Hi, I'm Zuill Bailey, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Zsolt, thanks so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Let's start out with this notion that classical music is dying. This is repeated so many times that I wonder sometimes if people are actually just starting to believe it because people are saying that it's dying. But you've performed all around the world. What's actually happening?
It's not dying. First and foremost, the audiences are older because that's when time in your lives is able to be taken to appreciate things. I think the goal of us as musicians and educators is to bring that joy to people younger so they have more time to enjoy classical music throughout their life. Everyone always talks about how the young people's concerts changed the classical landscape by bringing Leonard Bernstein into homes, and that's true. Accessibility to the arts is very, very important. But I've been doing this, 25, 30 years already, and the audiences, as far as I've seen, have stayed the exact same age. And the appreciators are just as vital, not vital, but they're just as voraciously wanting more of it. But I've taken it to another level as I've decided that for those who don't know about classical music, it's our job, my job, to take it to them.
Do you feel like the lack of music or the arts in the schools has something to do with this supposed generational shift? Possibly.
I try to remind people that music is everywhere. And the idea, in my opinion, that the description of what classical music is not necessarily Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms and Haydn. Classical music as a genre is the use of these instruments. So classical music is in everyone's lives through movies and video games and everything else. And again, going back to bringing that awareness to people, the moment they see what a cello is and a cello can be, what it does, or a violin or a piano, then they start identifying it in all the things that are around them anyway, whether it be music in the elevator, whether it be music at the concert hall, whether it be music in the supermarket, whether it be music for their favorite movie. Education in the schools for a long time was a given, and that's fantastic. But things do change, and that's inevitable. And so people have to change with it. And so through, again, my belief and how it was brought to me as a young person, I don't see it as a loss. I see it as my turn to carry the torch forward and do what they did for me.
You grew up in Virginia to a musical family. Was your first exposure to music at home, or was it in school?
Music to me has always been a feeling. It was in school, but it was also at home. My mom's a pianist. My dad is an educator of music, but a clarinetist also. My sister plays the violin. They took us to concerts all the time. It was just a way of life, but it was also a way of life with many other things. I did play sports. I took art classes. But we were in a very interesting area of the world, Washington, D.C. area, where 20 miles south of D.C., those 20 miles from Northern Virginia to the city had 10 regional orchestras. So every 5 to 10 miles, every couple of miles, had another regional orchestra of some kind that grouped all the musicians together to become inspired to then go back into their schools and their daily lives to inspire the kids. I also had opportunities as a student where the people would come to my school and play for us. Had they not done that, I would never have known to like something, because as children, we're sponges. So music was everywhere for me as a child. Just like, again, you relate it to pop music, and when you listen to something, it reminds you of middle school or high school or college. I have those same feelings when I hear classical music. When I heard my first Dvorak cello concerto, it happened to be Rostropovich at the Kennedy Center. When I heard my first speech given about the descriptors of why someone should appreciate classical music, it was Pinka Zuckerman and Itzhak Perlman and Lynn Harrell and all of these guys that were around during those days playing frequently. So I was hearing from the best, which made me realize that if people hear the best, they know the difference.
So you had a lot of exposure to music as a kid. How did you come to the cello? Why the cello as opposed to another instrument?
Well, the funny story is that my parents did not want me to play the violin. They were told because of my sister playing the violin of competition. Yeah. One of the first encounters that I had with the cello was backstage at a youth symphony concert. I got loose from my parents at age 4. Ran backstage and crashed into this girl. She dropped her cello, the neck broke. I pointed down and said, I'd like to play the cello. So I jokingly say that was my first run-in with the cello. But the reality is then they got me a cello because it made sense being that she played the violin. They sat me on what most people don't even know what it is, a telephone book that were in the DC area this thick. 3 of them, and they put the cello in front of me, and I pushed down on the strings, and they said that I shut my eyes and smiled, and I played for about 10 minutes, just open strings, and that's what it always comes down to for me. The vibrations, the beauty of the sound. I didn't know how to express what I felt, but I didn't want it to stop. And from that day forward, my parents had to ask me to stop playing the cello. They got me a teacher immediately, Suzuki method. I did that for about 5 years. Then they got me a teacher that was in the National Symphony, Lauren Stevenson, who really was a very strict, methodical, structured teacher to teach me about the tools on how to play the cello. Every time I, again, played the cello, I wanted to play more and more. And at 12 is when it all kind of came together.
The Suzuki method, do you advocate that? Do you believe in it?
Well, sure. I mean, because it worked for me. I mean, it worked for me because it's like learning a language. You're just using your ears and you're mimicking and watching someone. So all I did was I heard what someone else did and I tried to reproduce it without complicating it with reading music or other things at age 4. All I wanted to do was what that person was doing.
What was the moment where you realized that music was what you wanted to do for your life, or was there a moment at all? Was there a particular inspiration?
Well, yeah, the exact moment was 30 years ago, almost this year. I had been playing. I had done a lot of rote playing, so I practiced a lot, but I practiced just in time, playing things over and over. And I played with my eyes shut a lot for whatever reason. And I didn't really remember playing. I would just play and kind of go into a trance. And I'd remember afterwards kind of going through the motions. I was lucky enough to win a local symphony competition with the Cessna's Cello Concerto
Great piece.
at 12 years old. And they gave me an opportunity to play with orchestra. There were probably 800 people at the concert. I walked out, as I did in the trance, sat down, started playing. In the middle of the second movement, for whatever reason, I opened my eyes. And I saw that everyone had their eyes shut. And I looked around and I started looking, I literally woke up. I had never seen myself really play the cello before. And I started, like literally goosebumps went everywhere. And people were smiling in the audience like this. And I realized that all of this was happening at the same, we were all feeling the same thing, even though I was at the moment producing that, but the orchestra and everybody was one. I also saw it as an escape, that all of a sudden music was the reason why all of these people got together to kind of take a time out from their lives, to feel something that they couldn't otherwise. And then what happened was I walked off stage completely awake. I'd never noticed how many steps it was to get off stage. I was like a robot walking off the stage trying to figure out how to get back to my dressing room. And a man was standing there, a mysterious man that I'd never seen before. And he said, I want to give you some advice. And I said, what? He said, if you can find what you love to do and make it your life, you'll never have to get a job. And I looked at him and I said, well, there's only music. And he just walked away. And from that day forward, the day I woke up, the advice that set me in motion to make decisions based on love and my instinct versus money and everything else that people want, that I thought I wanted, has driven me since then.
That's incredible. So there was this amazing moment of self-awakening. There was this old man there. I don't know if he was old, but it seems like he was almost a prophet there. witnessed a moment since that time? Have you opened up your eyes again and witnessed a similar moment? Is that something that you try to replicate
all the
consciously?
time. I try to actually replicate that through what I do through music. So I'm very conscious of action-reaction in my concerts and being real and being awake. I think most people, and this is also why I'm asked all the time, do you take vacations? Because I told you how much I work. None of this is work to me. None of this is work. When I see the joy from these kids or adults or older people, wherever it is, it's all the same pure joy. And it's so overwhelming to me that I can't stop doing it. I can't stop wanting them to feel that way because it actually is a feeling that's brought back to me.
How do you deal with the stresses of travel? So, for people who don't know, a cellist typically has to fly his or her instrument in a separate seat, and that effectively doubles your cost with plane tickets.
Right.
Or there are also aspects like jet lag, and you're on the road more than half of the time in the year. How do you deal with the constant being on the road?
You're right. I don't think people realize how difficult it is. I think that if people, including my students, realized what I go through physically and mentally just to survive doing what I'm doing, let alone produce music at the highest level I can, they would never go into music. I think there's an unknown. In my career, I've built muscles that have enabled me to do it. I luckily enjoyed building those muscles. It was an adventure. I love traveling. I didn't travel as a child. We didn't travel much as a child. So I think that first concert I was telling you about in 8th or 7th grade, I'd never been on an airplane before. I don't think we'd ever actually eaten at a restaurant before. My mother made all the meals, and we traveled by car, and we would do things as a family. But this sense of adventure and seeing the world through this cello has become, obviously, my life to the extreme. But I made a deal with myself. I said to myself when I was living in New York City that at age 30, if I couldn't make a living on the cello exclusively, then I would start to consider something else. I also got some advice by Joel Krosnick, my teacher at Juilliard, who said, after a really intense discussion about opportunities out there for musicians when I was kind of in the most vibrant time of my studies, where I could have gotten a job, I could have gotten this. And he said, don't make your decisions based on money at this time in your life. Live poor as long as you possibly can, because then when you start making decisions based on money, you start thinking business-wise, and it becomes less of your passion and your mission. He said, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, you're going to lose that. So I said, okay, I was 22 at the time. I gave myself 8 years to figure out how to live this way and to see if this turns into a way to feed that financially. And interestingly, the moment I got out of Juilliard, I looked at my bank statement. It was like a symbol. And I actually was making just enough as a cellist to pay my bills that moment. Before that, I was not. But the moment I hit that place, so all of a sudden I was free as a student, and I guess I was sort of a professional.
Did you have a manager at that point, or
I did not have a manager at that point. In fact, when I met my first manager, they said, how do you have all these gigs? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you don't have a manager. I mean, how do you have 30 concerts a year as a student or right out of school? I said, well, when I go play a place, generally speaking, they've invited me to do something else in the future. And, I'd won some competitions that had given me a lot of opportunity. Yeah. But they were not one-offs. But it goes back to, again, me wanting to be part of a community. When I would go there, it wasn't just I showed up. I would get off the plane and ask, how can I help? How can I help? Well, what do you mean by help? No, are there schools around here I can go play for other than the recital that I'm playing? And they were just so like, who are you? And this is, again, when I was 17 and 18. So when I was 23, 24, 25, and the concept of a manager came into the picture, I actually had something to manage. And that's the difference, I think, in a lot of young people. Another student of mine came up to me at Peabody and said, how do you have so many concerts? I said, what are you talking about? He goes, You have so many concerts. How much do you get paid? I said, well, how many concerts do you have? He goes, I have, oh, why are you asking me that? I said, well, how much are you getting paid? He goes, I won't pay for less than $800. I said, maybe that's your problem. So I was playing because I wanted to play. And when people would pay me at that age, I was like, oh my God, thank you. And then it turned into that. So I looked for opportunities. I would go to churches and I would say, could I play for your offertory? Could I play for the meditation thing? And I would play the Bach that I was working on. I would play the meditation from Thais. I'd play these beautiful things. And then they would say, we have a funeral coming up. I think it would be very nice if you played that there. Sure, they can pay you $200. Great, I'd love to do it. And then it started parlaying into me just playing. So when students, this is again, when I was 18, 19, when all this was going on, when a student comes up to me and says, should I go into music? I say, probably not. Because I never asked myself that question.
Wow.
Who would ask themselves that question?
Yeah.
Of course you're going into music. What is life without music? And so when I'm teaching my students, I ask them questions. I always say things like, what do you want? I want to play the cello. What does that mean? Well, I want to be a performer. So what are you doing about it? What does that mean? They ask me that. Well, where can you play? You've got to play if you want to be a performer. Now, one student said, I'd like to do what you do. I said, what do I do? He didn't know what I did. He just said that. He didn't know all the things that occupy my day and my life. And so I said, you can't just blindly say that. What makes you happy? What would you like to do if you woke up in the morning and could do that? So I try to give them a shove to say, you can't just sit back and wait for, and that's the other thing about the joke at Juilliard. Everyone's sitting there waiting for someone to knock on the door and say, we're ready for you. Here's your career. and that's, I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my career slowly developed. I attracted what I was looking for. I exuded what I wanted to happen, and then the situations magnetized because they needed that at the time. So I was visiting El Paso. I was already in this state where I was going crazy, I appreciate what I do for a particular city for 4 days, but it's maddening to then leave, come back maybe 4 years later, and see that nothing has been going on. No one has gone out of their way to do what I did for those 4 years. The reason why is because I was told that. And that was during my 20s. So at 29, El Paso, Texas, which is 800,000 people big, huge, 40 miles long.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they said, would you consider being our artistic director? And my first question was, what does that mean? We'd like to have you help us sculpt the cultural landscape of the next generation.
Wow, that's quite a way to put it.
And I said, I can share what I know. They said, well, we've been watching what you do, and that's all we want, is just be you. And I said, and that I can be. So I moved from New York City, and I knew that I'd never done that before, but I knew that I could stop if it wasn't making me happy. But I found, and this was a really, really interesting moment, one of the first concerts that I presented was the Juilliard String Quartet. And the concert hall, which was rather large, I made a point to educate El Paso at how important this event was. And they sold out. And when the Juilliard Quartet came to El Paso, Texas and walked on stage, me standing there in my suit in the back, no cello in sight, the entire audience stood up and gave them a standing ovation before note one. I got goosebumps up the back of my head the same way as when I play a concert that is the most fulfilling concert with all the work as a cellist. So I realized that what I wanted to do was be a connector to make people's lives better.
Zuill, was there anything that you learned after you graduated that ended up being essential to your mission as a musician?
I was so driven to at the craft of cello playing as a young person, that I did miss. I was living in a bubble. I mean, my first girlfriend was essentially in college. I mean, it was one of those things I just literally blinders on. And at 19, freshman of college, I went into several situations where Rostropovich was involved. And I did not do very well in one of these situations. And afterwards, he took me aside and said, how do I phrase this? He said, I want you to know that you're a great cellist, but what you lack in your playing is pain and suffering. And now you have it, based on this situation, because he sabotaged me. And he said, and in the end, that's all people want to hear. They want to hear a human being playing their instrument.
What did that do to you when he said that?
It made me very angry. It made me very, it took me completely off my feet that someone would do that on purpose. Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely right. It woke me up to realize, what was I drawing from as a musician? So I can play the cello, or could play the cello. So what was I sharing? Music is about feeling and life, but I hadn't really had a life yet. So in my 20s, I decided to just try to wake up and become a more functioning human being, and I felt myself really wobbly-kneed many times for the first time. That's when I stopped doing competitions, because I felt fallible, I felt mortal. I felt for the first time, which means I had a flexible sound, which means my music was coming from a place that, knowing that there might not be success, which makes a person human. And this whole evolution happened, and still into my 30s.
Are you ever afraid of not being in your fullest capacities when on stage?
Of course. Yeah. Of course, I've walked on stage so sick and so thinking I was going to die. I've walked on stage having shouting matches with people in my life right beforehand, and I've got to find a way to compartmentalize that and walk on stage and make no one know that that's happening, and then to have the music come through me purely being without my pushing that on it. And then I realized at that point what music was to me. Every time I picked up the cello, music centered me, no matter what was going on. It brought great peace. It was like a safe place for me. So for me, the stage is the place where I can fully be me, as just in a meditative state, kind of letting all of this come through. But I also, I've never played a perfect concert. I don't ever want to play a perfect concert, because if I do, then I think I'm done. I want to walk off stage and go, I want more there, or that opened a whole door that I didn't see that was possible, or wow, the harmonies there were glorious. I didn't know based on what my life was happening at the time. I mean, many of the pieces that I play, I titled life pieces. Dvorak, Elgar, all these things that were written at the height of their powers, but there were lots of things circulating in the composers' lives at the time. And when people started dying in my life, and I started kind of empathizing with them, writing these pieces through these times in their life, the pieces completely changed. Cellists are lucky because we have some of the greatest music, but we have a small enough repertoire that we can keep revisiting them and keep refining them, unlike the pianists of the world who have to maybe specialize because the piano repertoire is so massive. So I can relive Elgar, I can keep, or Dvorak, or Shostakovich, or Prokofiev for the Bach cello suites, and keep mulling over them and using them as inspiration.
Your recording of the Bach cello suites is was extraordinarily successful and remained at the top of the charts for a long time. What was it that invited you to prepare those pieces for 10 years before recording them?
Fear. I did it because I didn't think I could. I did it because these were the exact pieces that exposed me to realize that I had gaps in me as a person, and hadn't really dealt with lots of things. As you know, the Bach cello suites, the decision is yours. There is no manuscript. Every decision, accessibility, your presentation, the tempos, the dynamics, the style is based on what? And that's a big question mark. That's your decision versus, and then you have to decide, so what is it based on? And so I went back and I felt that every time I played Bach, it exposed me and I didn't like it. And so I did it again and I didn't like it less. And then I did it again, and then I started realizing that every time I tried to play Bach in public, and try is the key word, that I got stronger and more sure-footed in other aspects of my life.
Is there a story behind your cello?
When I was 26, 27, I walked into a violin shop and I had a really interesting situation happen. So there was a Stradivarius cello there that was for sale. And I went there daily because it was one of my hobbies to go and play every cello I could in my 20s. And the dealer handed me the cello and I started playing and I just was like, oh my God. And I kept playing and the sound was gold and I kept looking towards the heavens and I kept going, the angels are everywhere and I actually, this is God-like and there is no greater sound than this. And I just kept smiling and smiling. And literally, my cheeks were sore. And then there was a knock at the door, and he goes, "Oh yeah, and I want you to try this one too." And it was this beast of an instrument that was a little less refined looking, almost twice as big. And he put it down, and I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Just try it." So I put the Stradivarius down, and I picked up this other instrument, and I put the bow down, and it sounded like a chainsaw. It sounded like a Harley Davidson, like it was just the most sound. And I was just like, what? I couldn't control it, and I pushed down, I started working at it. I immediately put it down. I picked up the Stradivarius again, I was just like, oh my God, this is, I can see why Stradivariuses are so sought after. But as I was playing it more, I started kind of looking down and going, well, that instrument, that is really messed up, that instrument.
Yeah.
Picked up the other instrument again. And I played it and I started kind of working at the sound. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it became better. And then I kind of did this and I did this and then it became better. And I started realizing that I was becoming better. And I started looking at the sounds and I started, could I make this sound from that instrument? And I did. And I started realizing, I get it. At that very moment, the man came in and said, so what do you think? I said, well, the Stradivarius is perfect. But there's something that's bothering me deeply about this cello. And he said, well, do you want to take one for the weekend? And I said, sure. He said, which one? I said, I want to take this one. He said, why? He said, because the Stradivarius is playing me. And I'm playing this one. And this is going to realize my dreams. And those are going to be someone else's. And he said, I knew it. And he said, it's a Matteo Gufriller cello, built in 1693. It was the career instrument of Misha Schneider of the Budapest String Quartet. And it's literally, he said, how would you describe it? And I said, well, it's very interesting you say that, because when I looked down at the Stradivarius and I started describing it earlier, I was looking at the heavens and the angels. And when I talked about this instrument, I looked down at the earth and and it's got this, and it's got muscles, and it's so human and tangible. And I said, so it's like heaven and hell. But I want to be me. I want to drive my own destiny. So I'm taking this one. So that weekend, I played it at a concert. I made some announcement about a Bach cello suite. A gentleman, a family friend of my father's, came up to me after the concert and essentially bought it for me on the spot. And it was just like, it reminded me of many things, of going with your instinct, timing, realizing that dreams sometimes can come true, and also why I made that decision. That cello represents to me what I do in my life. I drive it. I want to be in control of it. I want to create a better something for me and everybody around me.
What do young people, or audiences in general for that matter, lose by not having a physical recording to hold? Because most things are shifting to digital now.
That's a great question. Well, the first part is that, like you, I'm an avid record collector. I started buying CDs. CD was my medium when they came out in like '83. So every week, new CDs would come out, and I would take my paper route money and the competition money, and I would buy whatever came out. So I'm about 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 cello CDs in now. And what I like about them is that they showcase many aspects of the history of music and cello. They also showcase the seclusion of different countries and how that produced a different flavor of player and perception of music. So back in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, the French players sounded very much different than the Spanish players, very much different than the Russian players. And the documentation of people's careers, their lives, the situations, once you read their biographies, they become these time capsules of channeling, like the composers themselves, their lives through these performances. I have always been drawn towards the less manicured live performances, which I also collect avidly, not knowing full well that there are coughs and there are pops and missed notes, but I know that they're living this and they're going for it because that's the moment. It's not looking for the perfect anything. So with this massive recordings and this catalog, I would sit down and experience a concert or an experience of a disc while reading all about the artist, the music, and everything tangible. It also goes back to how people memorize and absorb material. We have to use many of our senses. The more senses we can use to absorb new material, the more we never forget them. That's the visceral aspect of memorization. So you use your eyes, your ears, your smell, your muscle memory, your touch. And so I typically, if you heard me practice, you would hear someone talking to themselves in a practice room. I'd speak about it, I would repeat, I would write things down. I don't type, I type beautifully, but I write longhand on legal pads because I want to feel the aspect of writing words out to memorize how that works. So going back to the recordings, I would read all about these things while listening, absorbing the sounds to the visuals, to then my imagination, to then going one step further. When I was given the opportunity to record, which was late 20s, early 30s, it was a fluke. I had just done that TV show Oz, where I was on the HBO prison show as a cellist, glorified outreach, non-acting. But I was stopped so many times in the airports by people, and this is why I did the show, saying I had never heard a cello before. Where can I get a CD of great cello music that would show me, or do you have a CD? All the things you played. Well, after about a year of this, of like ridiculous amounts of people asking for an entryway into the cello world, I went to the producers of Oz, and they helped fund a recording that came out on Delos. That was my debut CD. The whole idea. So
you didn't have a CD until that point?
No.
Wow.
And they put together a Bach cello suite, a couple of short pieces, Mendelssohn, Chopin, Vieuxtemps, as much as I could, easy listening music that would access classical music to these newbies. And because of that, it turned into someone heard that, and then they asked me to play the Korngold Cello Concerto in Vienna, or in Austria. And then I liked the recording process a lot, but I didn't like the let's do it again, let's do it again, let's do it again. 6 hours later, let's do it again, because we're trying to make sure everything fits beautifully. I didn't see music that way. And I started realizing that if I were an actor, I'd be a Broadway actor. I would not be a film actor because I want to give it one time. So when the opportunity came to go one step further and record for Telarc and all of these other things that I was doing, especially concertos, I had the option to record live. And I decided to do that because I wanted to emulate those recordings way back in the 30s that were 1 or 2 takes versus the hundreds of takes that they do for recordings now, where they go through and weave all the perfect things together, but you get one thought process in recordings. So I put out recently the Dvorak, the Elgar, the Britten Cello Symphony. The new one coming out is the Bloch Shlomo, and the world premiere of the Nico Muhly Cello Concerto, which I'm really excited about, all live. Most of them are with the Indianapolis Symphony. The Britten was with the North Carolina Symphony. And you really truly feel, with the highest fidelity possible, which is what Telarc is with the 5/4 productions, you feel like you're at the concert in the best seat in the house, and you feel like you can just grab it. There's I was told this, there is such thing as a recording artist. And what that means to me is you learn to record well. Mm-hmm. Recording in itself, like being an actor on TV or in the movies, is an art form. It's not just a one-shot deal. You have to keep recreating emotion. I've learned more through recording than I ever did practicing anywhere, because you learn your craft under pressure and you learn to control your sounds and everything you want when you need it, versus just hoping it's going to work out based on passion. So because of the recordings that I've done in the studio, that parlayed into a middle ground of being able to give a live performance that's more about a polished overview, knowing it's being documented forever.
Zuill, thanks so much for being on the show and for giving your time and your insights into your life and music.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It was fun.
Yes.